I'm Leo Callahan, 35 years old, and by trade, I'm a geologist for a mineral company out here in Boulder, Colorado. People ask about my roots, and the easy answer is a little town called Flat Rock, a place lost in the endless expanse of Kansas wheat fields. But the truth is, if someone were to ask where I truly belong, I wouldn't have an answer. It's a question that has haunted me. My entire life has been a quiet search for a real home, one that didn't carry the sour, biting stench of cheap whiskey or echo with rage-filled yelling that shook the floorboards. A place where I didn't have to get good at hiding the marks on my arms, marks I accepted for too long as just a part of growing up. From the quiet of my house today, I can finally look back on how a boy steeped in that kind of pain managed to find his way, even when the road ahead was impossibly dark. Flat Rock was never going to be featured on a postcard. It was a worn-down place, defined by its cracked pavement and the fact that its one tavern drew a bigger crowd on a Sunday than the town chapel ever did. Our home was set apart on the very last street, a tired two-story house with paint curling off the siding and shingles missing from the roof like lost teeth. We kept the windows sealed year-round, a silent family agreement to keep our ugly truths from spilling out into the open. My father, Frank Callahan, was supposed to be a mechanic, but his tools gathered more dust than grease. My mother, Eileen, had worked as a checkout girl until I turned 5, when she gave it up, claiming the world outside had no use for her. They were both lost to the same disease, fueled by the harshest, cheapest spirits the corner market sold. That bottle was a third parent in our house. It could fill the rooms with hollow laughter 1 hour and gut-wrenching sobs the next. Sometimes it pitted them against each other in brutal arguments, but the worst was when that poison turned their eyes toward me and my siblings. I was their first, born back when they were just kids themselves, still holding on to some fragile idea of a different future. But whatever hope they had evaporated into the air, vanishing as quickly as it came. A decade later, my brother Evan arrived, all blonde hair and wide blue eyes, always staring at me as if I held the answers to everything. He made me feel like I had to be a giant. Then came Noah, the baby who was just a toddler when the last illusions I had about our family shattered completely. Those boys were my whole world. My one purpose was to be a shield for them, to stand between them and the chaos, and I would have taken any blow meant for them without a second thought. There were no family outings or new bikes with gleaming chrome in my memory bank. My childhood was measured in sleepless nights, balled up under a thin blanket, my ears ringing with the sharp crack of a thrown bottle and my mother's pleading cries after my father came home empty-handed from another card game. The moment it truly dawned on me how different we were is burned into my mind. I was 7 years old, and my first-grade teacher, Mrs. Gable, asked me to stay behind after the final bell rang. Her voice was so soft it was almost startling. "Leo," she said, her eyes full of a worry that made my stomach twist. "Is everything all right? I noticed your shirt collar is ripped, and that mark on your arm." My eyes shot down to the ugly purple blotch blooming on my bicep. The lie came out before I even had to think about it, a reflex I was already learning. I fell. During recess, ma'am, playing kickball. I froze, hoping she'd buy it. The look on Mrs. Gable's face told me she knew I was lying, but she let it go. She didn't push. And in that moment, I understood with absolute certainty that I was on my own. Nobody was coming to help. No one would ever cross the threshold of that house, a place so grim that even the daylight seemed to shy away from its windows. But the thing about my father was he wasn't a monster every minute of the day. There were these rare, fleeting days when the alcohol hadn't yet taken hold of him. On those afternoons, he'd sit with me on the porch steps, his voice low as he spun tales of our Irish forefathers, tough, stubborn farmers who had stared down famine and fought through wars. "Callahan blood is warrior blood, son," he'd declare, his eyes lit with a pride so unfamiliar it was dazzling. I clung to those moments, hoarding them like treasure, because in them, for just a little while, I had a father again. But then the bottle would find its way back into his hand, and that man would vanish, replaced by a stranger whose hands were quicker and harder than his words. My mother's cruelty was a different kind. She never laid a hand on me, but her silence, her absolute indifference, was a wound that never scabbed over. I remember when I was 10, I ran all the way home from school clutching a drawing my teacher had gushed over, my chest tight with hope. I was sure this would be the thing that made her proud. She took one look at it, her face blank, before turning her back to me. "There's no space in this house for useless clutter," she mumbled, her focus already gone. I just stood there, the paper crinkling in my fist, and felt something inside me collapse. It wasn't hate I felt for her. I couldn't bring myself to hate her. I just desperately needed her to see me, to really look at me just one time. But I refused to let that emptiness break me. Instead, I found my escape in the pages of books. The town library, a little brick building that smelled of aging paper and dust motes dancing in the sunlight, became my refuge. Its creaky floors were the sound of safety. I devoured everything I could get my hands on, from tales of high seas adventure to thick science textbooks. It was there, lost in those quiet stacks, that I first stumbled upon geology. The stories of the earth itself, of ancient rocks, towering mountains, and the incredible minerals buried deep in its core, captivated me completely. I was drawn to the idea that our planet, though battered and scarred by time, held beautiful and valuable secrets inside. Maybe I thought I was like the Earth. Maybe I was wounded on the surface, but there was still something worthwhile hidden deep down. Being the oldest meant I learned to become a buffer between my brothers and the storm in our house. Whenever my father's rage started to build, I'd hustle Evan and Noah into my bedroom, turn the key in the lock, and start telling them stories. My voice loud enough to cover the sound of the yelling from downstairs. One day, I'd promise them, my voice full of a confidence I didn't feel, "We're going to get out of here. We'll have our own house, a nice one with a big green yard and windows we can leave wide open." Evan would always nod, his eyes shining with complete faith, while little Noah would just squeeze my arm tighter like he was afraid I might disappear. I wasn't just spinning tales to calm them down. I had to believe every word I said. That belief was my lifeline. Without it, I don't think I could have made it through. Things took a nosedive the year I turned 15. My father finally got fired from the auto shop after showing up drunk one too many times and getting into it with his boss. With no money coming in, the tension in the house became unbearable, and the violence escalated. I'll never forget the night he went after Evan for dropping a glass. I stepped between them, trying to shield him, and my father threw me against the wall so hard I slid to the ground. I can still feel the shock of the cold floorboards on my back, hear the blood pounding in my ears. I looked up and saw the crazed, vacant look in his eyes as he lifted his fist. But for some reason, he hesitated. He just stood there for a second, then turned and staggered out the front door, slamming it behind him. I was left on the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Evan rushed over crying, and I pulled him into a hug, whispering the usual reassurances that everything was going to be fine. But as I held him, a cold certainty washed over me. Whispers weren't enough anymore. I needed a real plan. I started taking any odd job I could find. A paper route in the pre-dawn darkness and cleaning floors at the grocery store on weekends. Every dollar I made went into an old biscuit tin that I kept buried beneath the roots of the big oak tree in our backyard. That wasn't just cash in the tin. It was a tangible piece of hope. It was my secret vow to my brothers that I was going to get us out. I threw myself into my schoolwork with a new kind of desperation. There were nights the power was shut off, and I'd study by the beam of a flashlight, huddled under my covers, poring over my textbooks until the pages blurred. My science teacher noticed my drive. She pulled me aside one day after class. "Leo," she said, her expression serious, "you have a brilliant mind. You can achieve anything you set your sights on. You need to fly high and fly far from here. Don't ever let this town clip your wings." Her words became a tiny, steady flame inside me, something I could turn to for warmth on the worst days. It was just enough to keep me going. But I wasn't made of stone. There were nights, sitting alone in the suffocating darkness of that house, when I'd let myself wonder if I was selfish for wanting more, for dreaming of a different life. Because the most painful part was that, underneath all the anger and hurt, I still loved my parents. Faded memories would surface. My mother humming a lullaby to me when I was very small. Or the afternoon my father patiently showed me how to grip a baseball. Those moments made it impossible to truly hate them, but they also twisted the knife, because they were ghosts of people who were long gone, a constant reminder of what I had lost and would never get back. The day I turned 18, a thick envelope arrived. It was a full scholarship to study geology at a university in Colorado. This was it, the moment I had been working toward, praying for as long as I could remember. It was a golden key, a door swinging open to a life I could barely imagine. When I told my parents the news, my mother offered a weak, fleeting smile. My father just sneered. "Don't you go off thinking you're better than us just because you're getting some fancy education," he slurred. I didn't say a word back. There was no point. I just quietly packed my bag, held Evan and Noah as tightly as I could, and swore to them both that I would be back for them. Then I walked out of that house and left Flat Rock without a single glance over my shoulder. As the bus pulled away, carrying me toward a new horizon, I stared out at the endless wheat fields blurring past the window. I didn't shed a tear, but a leaden weight settled in my chest. I wasn't just leaving them behind, I was also leaving behind a part of my own heart, the part of that young boy who had never quite given up hope that someday his family might actually become one. Everything I owned for this new chapter fit into a single backpack. A few changes of clothes and the old biscuit tin heavy with my hard-earned savings. I was headed for the University of Colorado Boulder, the recipient of a full-ride geology scholarship that felt like a miracle. The feeling was a strange mix of exhilarating freedom and paralyzing fear, like I was balanced on a wire stretched between the life I was running from and a future I couldn't yet see. When I first set foot in Boulder, it was like stepping onto a different planet. There was no lingering smell of stale cigarette smoke, no constant background noise of bitter arguments, no curious neighbors peering through their curtains. Instead, there were streets shaded by tall trees, dignified red brick buildings, and an air so clean and crisp it made me want to take my first full deep breath in years. But even with all that space, I felt like an imposter. My classmates, with their fresh new coats and casual tales of ski trips and family holidays, might as well have been aliens. I felt their world was a universe away from mine. I tried to make myself invisible inside my frayed old sweater, spending hours in the library with borrowed books so no one would see how little I had. My scholarship paid for my classes and a room in the dorms, but I still needed money. I took any work I could get, scrubbing plates in the dining hall, clearing snow from walkways in the biting winter cold, and delivering pizzas late into the night. There were days I ran on 3 hours of sleep, but I never once thought of complaining. Every single dollar I earned felt like another brick in the foundation of the promise I'd made to Evan and Noah. I wired money home whenever I could scrape it together, knowing full well where most of it would end up. I wrote letters to my brothers, filling the pages with descriptions of the towering mountains that framed the city and the amazing stones I collected on my geology field trips. In every letter, I renewed my promise to bring them to Boulder with me one day. Evan's replies were short, scrawled notes assuring me he was doing all right. Noah, too young to write, would just send me drawings of happy little houses with smiling suns in the sky. Receiving those letters felt like a punch to the gut every single time, a painful reminder that they were still stuck in that house in Flat Rock while I was free. Geology was my salvation. I was completely mesmerized in my classes, listening to lectures about the raw power of volcanic eruptions and how rocks that were millions of years old could tell us the entire history of our world. The field trips were the best part. I loved being out there, my hands on the ancient stone, feeling its rough, solid texture beneath my fingers and trying to imagine all the stories it had to tell. My professor, a tall, thin man named Dr. Albright, whose glasses were always slipping down his nose, saw how much it meant to me. "You've got a real gift for this, Leo," he told me after one of our excursions into the Rockies. "Rocks never lie. They tell their stories, but only to the people who are willing to listen." His encouragement made me feel seen, like I was more than just some damaged kid from a nowhere town. It made me feel like I might actually have something to offer. But no matter how much I tried to build a new life, the shadows of my past were long. I couldn't shake them. I would physically recoil if someone raised their voice, and I'd pull away if a friend's hand brushed my arm unexpectedly. The thought of anyone finding out about my family filled me with a deep, cold dread, so I never ever talked about Flat Rock. If a new friend asked about my parents, I would give a vague, tight-lipped answer. "They're fine, just regular folks," and then immediately steer the conversation somewhere else. I had constructed a fortress around my heart, determined to keep everyone out. I was terrified that if they ever saw the real me, the broken parts, they would run. And then, I met Clara. It happened in the spring of 2011. I was 21, a junior, and I'd gone to the campus library to check out a book on mineralogy for a class. And that's where I saw her. She was working behind the circulation desk, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun with eyes the exact shade of a clear Colorado sky. When I passed her my student ID, she gave me a smile that made my stomach do a nervous flip. I was so clumsy with people, especially girls, that all I could manage was a mumbled, "Thanks." "You're into rocks, I see," she said, her eyes flicking down to the heavy book on the counter. "I always thought they were just boring old rocks until I saw a piece of rose quartz one time. It was so beautiful. It looked like something from a fairy tale." Her voice was kind, without a hint of judgment, and standing there with her, I felt a knot in my chest loosen for the first time in as long as I could remember. Our relationship started slowly, unfolding in a way that felt easy and right. Clara was a revelation. She was brilliant and had a quick, playful wit, and she looked at the world with this incredible optimism, as if she truly believed that anything broken could be mended. She introduced me to hiking, taking me on trails through the mountains surrounding Boulder, where we'd find a quiet spot to sit and watch the sun dip below the peaks. I'd point out different formations and tell her about mineral lodes, explaining how lithium, the metal everyone wanted for their electric car batteries, was hidden deep inside the earth. She'd laugh and joke that I was more in love with rocks than I was with her. But the look in her eyes told me she got it. She understood my passion. When I was with Clara, I wasn't the boy from Flat Rock anymore. I was Leo, a man who had ambitions, a man who was capable of being loved. I graduated at 23 with my geology degree and almost immediately a job offer from a mineral exploration firm in Denver. The starting salary wasn't huge, but it was more than enough to get a small apartment and, most importantly, start putting real money aside for Evan and Noah. Clara landed a position at a public library in the city, and just like that, we started to build a life, dreaming about a future that was ours to make. I started to picture it, a small house of our own, with bookshelves lining the walls and a little garden out back where Clara could plant her flowers. For the very first time in my life, I allowed myself to think that happiness wasn't just a fantasy. It was something I could actually have, but my past wasn't finished with me yet. I talked to my brothers regularly, but now my parents were calling too, their voices always demanding. "You've got a good job now," my father would slur into the phone, his words thick and raspy. "It's your responsibility to look after your family." I kept sending the money even though I knew every cent was just feeding their addiction. I couldn't cut them off. It wasn't about love anymore, it was about fear. I was terrified of what they might do to Evan and Noah if the money stopped coming. Clara could see the toll it was taking on me, but she didn't know the whole story. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. I didn't want her to see that weak, broken part of me, the part that was still a prisoner of that house in Flat Rock. Then, when I was 25, she brought it up. "I want to meet your family," she said. We'd been together for 4 years, and to her it was the natural next step. My blood ran cold. The thought of her seeing that decaying house, of her witnessing one of my parents' drunken tirades, filled me with pure panic. But Clara was so gentle about it. She just took my hand and said, "Leo, I love you. All of you, not your history. I just want to know the person who made you who you are." I finally gave in, my heart hammering against my ribs with a dread I couldn't shake. We made the drive to Flat Rock one weekend that fall. The house looked just as I remembered it, only smaller and even more dilapidated. My father was already drunk, slumped in his usual armchair with a half-empty bottle dangling from his hand. My mother just stared at Clara with cold, hostile eyes as if she were a trespasser. When Evan, now a lanky 15-year-old, saw me, he wrapped his arms around me in a desperate hug. Noah, however, just watched me with a cool detachment in his eyes, a look that seemed to accuse me of abandoning them. Clara did her best to make small talk, but the atmosphere in that room was so toxic and oppressive, I just wanted to grab her by the hand and run. As soon as we were back in the car, she didn't speak. She just reached over and laced her fingers through mine, holding on tight. During the long drive back to Denver, I tried to apologize for them, for all of it, but she just shook her head. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Leo. You are so much more than where you came from." That night, back in the safety of my tiny apartment, Clara just held me while I finally broke down. For the first time since I was a little boy, I let all the walls come down and allowed myself to be completely vulnerable. She didn't flinch or pull away. She just stayed. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I started thinking about saving for a ring, about asking her to marry me even though I knew I couldn't afford much. I wanted to create a new family with Clara. A family built on love and respect, everything my own had lacked. But just as I was starting to feel like my life was finally on the right track, a phone call from my father shattered everything. It came on a cold winter evening. His voice was slurred as usual, but there was an unfamiliar, steely edge to it. "Leo, you need to get home," he demanded. "It's important." I pressed him, asking what was wrong, but all he would say was, "Just get back here, you'll see." An icy dread snaked its way up my spine. The last thing on earth I wanted to do was go back to Flat Rock. But there was something in his tone, a note of command I hadn't heard before that made it impossible to say no. The drive was a long, grim journey through snow-dusted landscapes, the car radio playing softly, a useless attempt to quiet the storm of anxious thoughts raging in my head. Pulling into Flat Rock, I had to take a long, deep breath, fighting back the familiar sense of suffocation that always seemed to hang in the air there. I pushed open the front door and found my father in his usual spot, slumped in the armchair, a whiskey bottle clutched in his hand, his eyes webbed with red veins. My mother was standing silently in the corner, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her stare heavy and suffocating. "Leo," my father started, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Sit. I have something I need to tell you." He took a long pull from the bottle before continuing. "My old friend, Thomas Donnelly, he came to me with an offer, a proposition. His daughter, Maeve, she needs a husband. And I told him you'd be the perfect man for the job." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't move. Thomas Donnelly was one of my father's only friends from high school. A decent, hard-working man who owned a sprawling ranch and farmland on the edge of town. His daughter Maeve had been in a terrible car crash a few years back that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. I had never met her, but I'd heard the whispers around town that she was a recluse who never left the ranch. "What are you talking about?" I finally managed to get out, my voice shaking with a rage that was boiling up inside me. "I'm not marrying anyone. I have a life. I have Clara." My father let out a contemptuous snort as if I'd just said the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. "Clara? That city girl's not for you, Leo. Thomas promised me, promised us, this family, $500,000 if you marry Maeve. Just think about it, son. That kind of money and it would change everything for us. Don't you want a better life for your brothers?" I just stared at him, my mind reeling, the number echoing in my ears. $500,000. The number hung in the air, a sickening weight. It wasn't the amount that stunned me, but the cold, hard fact that my own father was trying to sell me like a piece of property. "You're out of your mind," I said, my voice quiet but laced with venom. "I'm not doing it. I love Clara." I spun to face my mother, a desperate plea in my eyes, hoping for some sign of support, some flicker of maternal instinct. But she just kept her gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor, her mouth a thin, hard line. "Leo," she finally said, and her voice, though quiet, was sharp enough to cut. "You owe us. You owe this family. Your father and I gave you a roof over your head, and now you think you can just walk away? You think that piece of paper from your fancy college makes you better than us?" Her words were a deliberate, cruel twisting of the knife in wounds that had never healed. Just then, Evan appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "Leo, don't listen to them," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "You don't have to do this." My father whipped around, his face contorted with fury. "You shut your mouth, Evan. This has nothing to do with you." He took a step toward him, and I shot my hand out, my eyes locking with his in a silent warning. "Don't you touch him," I said, my voice dangerously low. For a split second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Hesitation. But then it was gone, replaced by a warped, mocking grin. "Oh, you'll do it, Leo," he sneered. "You'll come around. You always do what I tell you in the end, don't you?" I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I drove until I found a rundown motel on the highway and checked in for the night. Sleep was impossible. I just sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, staring at the peeling wallpaper, my mind racing, desperately searching for an escape. All I could think about was Clara, her laugh, her smile, the quiet evenings we spent curled up on the sofa talking about our future. A life without her wasn't a life at all. But then my thoughts drifted to Evan and Noah. My mind kept circling back to that number, $500,000. It was enough to get them out of that house, to give them a real childhood, the kind of fresh start I never had. I despised myself for even letting the thought cross my mind. The next morning, my hand was shaking as I reached for my phone to call Clara. But before I could dial, her name flashed on the screen. I answered, and her voice was flat, a stranger's voice. "Leo," she said, "I think we should break up." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The world tilted on its axis. I couldn't process it. "Why?" I stammered, my head shaking in disbelief. What did I do? You're just not the person I thought you were, she said, her tone clipped and final. And your parents, I can't be a part of that. Her words were like ice picks, each one striking a new, deeper wound. I pleaded with her, begged her to tell me what was really going on, but all she said was a cold, detached, "I'm sorry, Leo." Then the line went dead. And that was it. 4 years of love, of hope, of building a life together, gone. Erased in a phone call I couldn't begin to understand. I have no memory of the drive back to Denver. The only thing I remember is the gaping, hollow void in my chest, a feeling like someone had reached inside me and scooped everything out. Clara had been my hope. She was the one who made me believe I could outrun the darkness of my past. When I finally stumbled back into our apartment, it was already empty. Her things were gone. The space felt cavernous and cold. I collapsed onto the floor, and for the first time in my life, I reached for a bottle. I had promised myself I would never become my father, but that day I drank with a reckless abandon, hoping to drown everything, including myself. The days that followed were a blur of numb misery. I'd drag my soulless body to work in the mornings and come home to the empty apartment at night, where I would drink until I passed out. This went on for nearly a month, a spiral into the same abyss that had claimed my father, until one morning I looked at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. I knew I had to stop. I drove back to Flat Rock. I didn't go because I had a change of heart. I went because I had nowhere else to go. I had lost everything that mattered. My father, it turned out, had already made all the arrangements. Thomas Donnelly came over to our house, bringing Maeve with him. He shook my hand, thanking me for agreeing to the marriage, talking about the money and how his daughter needed someone to look after her. I barely heard him. I just stood there nodding numbly, feeling disconnected from my own body, like I was watching a scene from a movie about someone else's miserable life. Maeve was in her wheelchair, her dark hair pulled back neatly from her face. Her brown eyes were intelligent and watchful. She didn't offer a smile, and her only word to me was a quiet, formal hello. I couldn't meet her gaze without a wave of guilt washing over me. Not pity for her condition, but a shared sense of shame, knowing we were both just pawns in a game being played by our parents. When we were finally left alone for a moment, she spoke. "I'm not trying to trap you in this," she said, her voice steady but underscored with a profound sadness. "If you don't want to go through with it, you can just say so." I wanted to. God, I wanted to scream no and just run, leave it all behind. But the word wouldn't come. "I'll marry you," I heard myself say, and she simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement that we had just sealed a pact that neither of us desired. The wedding was a bleak affair in a small, cold church that felt as empty as I did. I was in an old suit that didn't fit right. Maeve wore a plain white dress. There were no flowers, no music. The only audience was my parents, their eyes gleaming with greed. And Evan standing off to the side, his face a mask of pain that I couldn't bear to look at. When the pastor asked if I took Maeve to be my wife, I wanted to shout no. I wanted to tell the whole world that I loved Clara, that this wasn't the life I wanted, that this was a nightmare. But all that came out was a hollow, "I do." And with those 2 words, my fate was sealed. After the ceremony, Maeve and I moved into a small house her father had rented for us on the outskirts of Denver. We lived like ghosts in that house, barely speaking. She spent her days with her books, and I buried myself in my work at the mineral company downtown. I took every extra shift I could, anything to stay busy and out of the house. I never blamed Maeve. None of this was her fault. But every night as I lay on the lumpy sofa, my mind would betray me. I'd think of Clara, wondering where she was, why she had really left me. The questions were a constant torment, a prison I couldn't find my way out of. Our house was a simple one-story place with pale yellow walls and floors that complained with every footstep. There was a small living room, a kitchen, and one bedroom, which I insisted Maeve take. My bed was the couch where I'd lie awake for hours under a thin blanket, just staring into the darkness. In the beginning, we were exactly what we were. Two strangers forced into an impossible situation. I was gone before sunrise and usually didn't get back until late. When I was home, I'd sit at the small kitchen table pretending to be absorbed in geological survey reports or writing letters to Evan and Noah. Maeve mostly kept to her room, leaving the door cracked just enough for a sliver of warm light from her reading lamp to spill into the hallway. She was always reading, thick, heavy novels and science texts that surprised me. The soft rustle of her turning a page was often the only sound that broke the heavy silence between us. I had no idea how to talk to her. Looking at her just filled me with a confusing mess of guilt and powerlessness. She hadn't asked for this life any more than I had. Yet there she was, a quiet presence in her wheelchair, her dark hair always tidy, her intelligent brown eyes seeming to follow me as if she were waiting for me to do or say something. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I wanted to make it clear that I didn't resent her, that I was just completely lost, drowning in the wreckage of my own life. But the words never came. I was afraid that if I started to talk, the fragile dam holding back all my pain and anger would burst. Maeve, however, didn't seem to need conversation. She moved through her days with a quiet composure that I found both impressive and deeply unnerving. Then one evening, about 3 weeks after we were married, I came home late, soaked to the bone from a sudden downpour. She was in the living room, a book about astrophysics lying open in her lap. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said, her voice even and calm. "You'll get sick." I just nodded, went to the kitchen for a towel, and when I came back, she was still watching me. "You don't have to tiptoe around me, Leo," she said softly. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but we're here. We could at least try to be civil to each other, don't you think?" Her directness caught me off guard. I sank into the armchair across from her, carefully maintaining the space between us. "I'm not avoiding you," I lied, and I knew she could see right through it. I don't know what to say." Maeve nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "Then let's start there," she suggested. "Tell me about your job. My father said you're a geologist. What does that actually mean?" I was taken aback. No one, not since Clara, had ever shown the slightest genuine interest in what I did for a living. I started to explain, my words clumsy at first, telling her about analyzing core samples and searching for telltale signs of valuable minerals like lithium and cobalt. Maeve listened intently, interrupting with surprisingly insightful questions about geological formations and the ethical implications of mining. I quickly realized she wasn't just smart. She had a real deep-seated hunger for knowledge, the same kind of passion I'd had for rocks when I was a kid. We talked for hours that night, and for the first time since I'd moved in, the little house didn't feel like a cage. That conversation started a new pattern for us. Most evenings, after a quiet dinner, we'd sit in the living room and trade stories. I told her about my college field expeditions into the Rockies and about a perfect quartz crystal I'd once found that shimmered like a trapped star. In return, Maeve told me about her own childhood, about a girl who used to race through her father's fields before the accident that changed everything. "I can't run anymore," she said one night, her voice matter-of-fact without a trace of self-pity. "But I found other things to love. Books, the stars, the world of ideas." I looked at her then, truly looked at her, and was humbled by her strength. I couldn't help but wonder why I wasn't as brave as she was. It wasn't a straight line to friendship, though. There were still days when the weight of what I'd lost with Clara was too much to bear. I'd come home from work locked inside my own head, haunted by dreams of her smile, of the feel of her hand in mine as we watched the sun go down. I'd wonder if she was happy now, if she ever thought about me at all. On those days, I'd retreat into silence, giving clipped one-word answers when Maeve asked if I was all right. She never pressed me for more, but I'd see the look in her eyes, not judgment or frustration, but a quiet, knowing empathy, as if she could see the battle I was fighting inside. Then one afternoon, about 3 months into our strange marriage, I came home to find a small leather-bound notebook lying on the kitchen table. Curiosity got the better of me and I opened it. The pages were filled with Maeve's elegant, precise handwriting. Notes about astronomy, sketches of constellations, and complex mathematical formulas that were completely beyond me. On the very last page, she had written a single sentence. "Everything happens for a reason, even if we can't see it at the time." I snapped the notebook shut, feeling like a trespasser who had stumbled upon something deeply personal. But her words stayed with me. I wanted so badly to believe her, to believe that this bizarre marriage, the gut-wrenching loss of Clara, that all of it had some greater purpose. But I just wasn't there yet. That weekend, Maeve suggested we go out to the backyard, a neglected little square of earth choked with weeds. "I want to plant a garden," she announced. "Will you help me?" I hesitated, knowing absolutely nothing about plants, but the hopeful, determined look in her eyes couldn't be refused. We spent the whole weekend out there, me turning over the hard, dry soil while Maeve directed operations from her wheelchair, her laughter echoing across the yard when I accidentally ripped open a bag of fertilizer and covered myself in it. "You're a menace, Leo," she teased, and I found myself laughing, a real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like an eternity. We planted daisies and sunflowers and rows of lavender that Maeve promised would brighten the whole house. By the time we were done, my hands were caked with dirt and there was a streak of mud on Maeve's cheek. Without thinking, I reached out and gently wiped it away. She looked up at me and her eyes were so open and kind that I had to turn away, a flush of embarrassment creeping up my neck. It was small moments like that, accumulating over time, that began to heal something in me. I started to realize that I actually looked forward to coming home from work, to seeing Maeve, to hearing about whatever new book had captured her imagination, or listening to her gently tease me about my disastrous attempts at cooking. She had this incredible ability to make everything feel lighter, as if she carried her own source of light inside her, a light that refused to be extinguished by the unfairness of her life. One warm summer evening when I was 27, we were sitting in the backyard, admiring the first of the daisies that had just begun to bloom. The sky above us was a brilliant tapestry of stars, and Maeve, her voice full of wonder, pointed out the constellation Orion. "Does it ever make you feel small?" she asked quietly. "All of those stars. They're billions of years old and we're just a blink." I looked at her then, her dark hair catching the soft glow of the moonlight, and for the first time my mind didn't drift to Clara. I was thinking only of Maeve and of how she made me want to actually live my life, not just endure it. "Maybe we are small," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "But this moment right here, it feels big enough for me." I can't pinpoint the exact moment I fell in love with Maeve. Maybe it was that night watching her smile among the flowers we'd planted together. Maybe it was all the evening she sat and listened patiently without judgment as I unloaded the frustrations of a bad day at work. Or maybe it was the slow dawning realization that she didn't need me to rescue her. She was far stronger than I had ever imagined, and what she wanted wasn't a savior, it was a partner. The love I felt for her was nothing like what I'd had with Clara. That had been a wildfire, a brilliant, all-consuming blaze. This was different. This was a quiet, steady flame that warmed me from the inside out, a constant source of comfort against the cold. Then one night, as Maeve and I were clearing the table after dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and my heart seized in my chest. It was Clara. She was standing on our porch, her hair cut shorter now, her blue eyes filled with a deep, unmistakable regret. "Leo," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." I felt the world shift as if time were rewinding, and all the pain I thought I'd buried came rushing back to the surface. From the dining room, Maeve looked over at us. She didn't say a word, but I saw the expression in her eyes. It wasn't jealousy, but fear. A fear that I was about to walk away. I asked Clara to come in, but she just shook her head. "No, out here is better," she whispered. We stood on the small porch, the crisp night air biting at our skin. Clara took a shaky breath. "Leo, I have to tell you the truth," she began. "Your parents, they paid me to leave you. They offered me money to start over somewhere else if I broke up with you, and I took it. I told myself it was for the best, that you'd be better off without my family baggage. But they never even paid me, and I couldn't live with the lie anymore." Her confession was a hurricane, ripping through the foundations of my past, tearing everything apart. I staggered back, grabbing the porch railing to steady myself. "They paid you?" I choked out, the words barely audible. Clara nodded, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Leo. I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but I had to tell you, you deserve to know." A white-hot rage flared inside me. I wanted to get in my car, drive all night to Flat Rock, and confront my parents. I wanted to scream at them, to demand to know why they had so methodically and cruelly destroyed my life. But as I stood there on the porch, looking at the woman I once thought I couldn't live without, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I realized with a startling clarity that I didn't love her anymore. It wasn't anger that had replaced the love. It was the simple truth that my heart now belonged to the woman who was waiting for me just inside that door. I told Clara I forgave her, though in that moment I wasn't sure if it was entirely true. I watched her walk away, then turned and went back inside. Maeve was still at the table, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes gentle but searching. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. I walked over to the table, sat down across from her, and reached for her hand. It was the first time I had ever done that. "I'm going to be okay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Because I have you." A slow, beautiful smile spread across Maeve's face, and in that instant I knew. This was it. I had finally found my family. But life, as I have come to understand, is never a straight path. It is full of twists you can never see coming. One morning in early October, my phone started ringing and wouldn't stop. It was Maeve's mother, her voice ragged with tears. "Leo, it's Thomas. Your father-in-law. He's gone. He had a heart attack during the night." The news was a shockwave. I didn't know what to say. Thomas Donnelly, the quiet, hard-working farmer who loved his daughter more than anything, was gone. Even though he was the architect of our arranged marriage, I had never held it against him. I knew he had only done what he thought was necessary to protect Maeve, a motive I understood better than most. I spent the next hour consumed with dread, trying to figure out how to tell her. But when I finally did, Maeve's reaction was not what I expected. She didn't break down. A profound, unsettling calm settled over her that both frightened and amazed me. She didn't shed a tear. She just went into the living room and sat in her chair, clutching that familiar astrophysics book to her chest. I sat on the floor beside her, helpless, knowing the only thing I could do was be present. "My dad always just wanted me to be happy," she said after a long silence, her voice quiet but firm. "He wasn't a perfect man, but he never stopped believing in me." I nodded, my throat tight, and took her hand in mine. And together, in the quiet of our little house, We began to navigate the vast, empty space of her grief. Thomas's funeral was held on a gray, drizzly afternoon in the small cemetery near his farm, back in Flat Rock. As I stood beside Maeve and watched her place a small bouquet of daisies on his casket, I made a silent promise to her and to him. I would spend the rest of my life making sure she never had to feel alone again. Thomas had left Maeve a will, and in that will was a deed to a huge tract of land on the edge of the Rockies not far from Boulder. It was a property he'd picked up for next to nothing years ago, a rugged expanse of barren hills and stony ground where he'd once dreamed of building a house for his family. Back in Flat Rock, everyone considered the land a bad investment, too isolated for any real development, the soil too poor for farming. Maeve and I didn't know what to do with it. Our lives were consumed by our daily routines, and I was deeply involved in a new project at work, analyzing data from a new mine site in Nevada. But life, it seems, had a plan for us. One weekend, on a whim, I suggested we take a drive out to see the property. It was partly professional curiosity, but mostly I just thought it would be good for us to get out of the city for a day. We drove out of Denver following winding roads that eventually opened up into a wide, untamed landscape. The grass was thin and patchy, and imposing gray rock formations stretched out toward the mountains in the distance. Maeve sat quietly in the passenger seat, looking out the window, a faraway look in her eyes. "Dad used to call this his someday land," she said with a small, sad smile. "He was convinced it would be valuable one day. Nobody else saw it." I smiled, assuming it was just a piece of uninteresting real estate. But when I got out of the car and my boots hit the ground, a flicker of something on the ground caught my attention. My training as a geologist has conditioned me to spot the smallest details. The glint of a specific mineral, an anomaly in a rock structure. I bent down and picked up a small dark stone. It was surprisingly heavy in my palm, and its surface had a distinct metallic luster. My pulse quickened. I started walking, my eyes scanning the ground, collecting more samples. It didn't take long for me to realize that these weren't just ordinary rocks. I took the samples into the company lab first thing that Monday. A week later, after a full battery of tests, the results came back, and they were staggering. The land was sitting on top of a massive, previously undiscovered lithium deposit. Lithium, the white gold of the clean energy revolution, was one of the most sought-after minerals on the planet, critical for the batteries that power electric vehicles. With market prices for lithium skyrocketing, this deposit was potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I raced home from the lab, the official report clutched in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. I found Maeve out in the garden, sitting in her wheelchair among the riot of colorful daisies, enjoying the late afternoon sun. "Maeve, you have to see this," I yelled, my voice shaking with an excitement I couldn't contain. I dropped to my knees beside her chair and spread the documents out on the grass, the columns of numbers and complex charts a blur in front of my eyes. I tried to explain it all, my words tumbling out in a jumbled, breathless rush, about the lithium, about her father's supposedly useless piece of land, about what this discovery meant for our future. "It could be worth hundreds of millions, Maeve," I kept repeating, the number still not feeling real. "Hundreds of millions." She stared at me, her brown eyes wide with disbelief, and then she threw her head back and laughed, a sound so full of pure, unadulterated joy that it seemed to fill the entire garden. "My dad," she said, her voice a perfect blend of wonder and pride. "He really did have the last laugh. He always told me this land had a secret. He knew. He knew all along, didn't he?" I nodded, and then I was laughing too, a deep, cathartic laugh that made me feel like that kid again, the one who'd gotten covered in mud planting flowers with her. I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair. This was more than just a geological find. This was a key that had just unlocked a future I had never, in my wildest dreams, allowed myself to imagine. But we didn't rush into anything. I brought the core samples and the preliminary data into the office and laid it all out for my team. They were speechless. I saw the look in my boss's eyes, Mr. Davison, the same look of excitement he'd had years ago when I was just an intern who had come to him with a crazy theory. "Leo," he said, his hand clapping me on the shoulder, "if these numbers are right, this is the find of a lifetime." The next few months were a whirlwind. I worked around the clock collaborating with a team of top engineers and negotiating with major mining corporations to get a proper valuation of the deposit. In the end, a massive mining conglomerate made an offer to purchase the extraction rights. The number they came back with was $250 million, plus a significant stake in the future profits of the mine. The day the wire transfer went through, I just sat at our kitchen table, staring at the balance on the online banking portal. The long string of zeros didn't seem real. It felt like a number from a dream, too big and abstract to be true. Maeve came and stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder, her fingers lacing through mine. "We can do anything we want now, Leo," she said softly. "So what is it that you want?" I turned to look at her, to look into her eyes that always seemed to hold the quiet wisdom of the night sky. And I knew the answer. "I just want us to be happy," I said. "Genuinely, truly happy." We bought a new house in Boulder, a beautiful 2-story home with huge windows that looked out over the Rockies, where every morning we could watch the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and rose. The large backyard became Maeve's personal sanctuary. She filled it with hundreds of flowers, drifts of white daisies, towering sunflowers, and fragrant lavender bushes that scented the entire property. And inside, we built our own library, a quiet corner of the house with floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves that we quickly filled with novels, science books, and all the astrophysics texts that Maeve loved so much. Maeve started writing a book, filling page after page with her brilliant thoughts on cosmology and the nature of the universe, as if she were finally free to chase the dreams that had once been confined to the 4 walls of her room. I stayed on at the mineral company, but in a new role. I now had a research division dedicated to developing sustainable and ethical mining practices, working to ensure that future discoveries like ours could generate prosperity without destroying the planet. Every evening when I pull into the driveway and see Maeve through the window, lost in a book or typing away in her library, I feel a profound sense of peace. I know without a doubt that I am finally home. The money was never just about being rich. It was about being free. It was the freedom to finally become the person I was always meant to be. It was the freedom to heal. I sent a substantial amount of money to Evan and Noah, enough for them to leave that dark house in Flat Rock for good. Evan, now 20, enrolled in the engineering program at the University of Colorado, his whole face lighting up whenever he talked about his plans to design bridges and skyscrapers. Noah, 17, found his calling in art. His canvases exploded with vibrant, joyful color, as if he were trying to paint over the gray world of his childhood with a new one full of hope. I got them a large apartment near the campus, one with big windows that looked out over a green park, a place where they would never again have to listen to the sound of breaking glass or angry yelling. Every time I visit them and see Evan laughing or watch Noah lose himself in his work, another layer of the guilt I carried for so long just peels away. I finally kept the promise I made to them on that bus all those years ago. With our own lives settled, Maeve and I started to dream on a bigger scale. We set up a charitable foundation in her father's name, a way to honor the quiet, kind farmer whose unlikely dream had changed our lives forever. The foundation's mission is to help young people who, like me, have been hurt or cast aside by their own families. We fund college scholarships, provide safe housing, and connect them with therapists and counselors to help them work through their trauma. Every time we get a letter, like the one from a 16-year-old girl named Maya who wrote to tell us she was going to be the first person in her family to go to medical school, it feels like another small victory, another piece of light pushing back the darkness. It's a constant reminder that we are on the right path. But even with a life now so full of purpose and love, with Maeve, with Evan and Noah finally safe, the ghosts of my past were never far away, always lurking in the periphery, waiting for a moment of weakness to drag me back down. It happened in the winter of 2020. I was at my desk at the office going over survey data from a new site in Wyoming when my phone vibrated. My mother's name lit up the screen. My first instinct was to reject the call. My thumb hovered over the button. But some small, stubborn part of me, the little boy who never completely gave up hope, made me swipe to answer. "Leo," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that turned my stomach. "Your father and I were thinking, we'd love to come for a visit. It's been so long, hasn't it?" My grip tightened on the pen in my hand until my knuckles were white. The air in my office suddenly felt thick and hard to breathe. I knew this wasn't about a family reunion. They never just wanted to visit. "I'll see what I can do," I said, my voice flat and cold, and ended the call before she could reply. The drive home was a blur of angry, chaotic thoughts. I found Maeve in our library putting the finishing touches on the last chapter of her astrophysics book. She looked up when I came in, and her smile faded as she saw my face. She knew immediately. "It's them, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft. "Your parents." She set her pen down as I slumped into the chair across from her desk. I told her about the phone call, and Maeve just listened, her gaze steady and patient, letting me get it all out. When I was finished, she reached across the desk and took my hand. Her fingers were warm and strong in mine. "Leo," she said, her voice firm, "you don't have to do this. You don't owe them anything. You've given them more than enough." I looked into her eyes, saw the love and worry there, and I knew she was right. But I also knew with a sudden gut-level certainty that this was something I had to do. I had to face them one last time. Not for them. For me. I called Evan to see what he knew. His voice on the phone was laced with a familiar bitter resentment. He told me what I already suspected. Our parents had burned through every last cent of the $500,000 from Thomas Donnelly, the money they'd gotten for selling me to his daughter. Evan said they'd bought a brand new pickup truck, paid off our father's mountain of gambling debts, and then pissed the rest away on booze and frivolous trips. "They're flat broke, Leo," Evan told me. "And now they've heard the news about the mine. They think you owe them a piece of it." I squeezed the phone so hard my hand ached, a phantom pain echoing in the old faded marks on my arms. I shouldn't have been surprised, but the confirmation of their greed was still a fresh wound, a sharp, twisting pain. A week later, they were on our doorstep. I opened the door to find them standing there, taking in our house. My father, Frank, his gray hair a mess, his eyes shot through with red. My mother, Eileen, pulling at the sleeves of a threadbare sweater, a brittle, practiced smile plastered on her face. "Leo, my boy," my father boomed, his voice oozing a false warmth that made my skin crawl. "This is some place you've got here. You've done all right for yourself." I didn't reply. I just stepped back and let them in, leading them into the living room. Maeve was already there, waiting in her wheelchair, her expression calm but her eyes missing nothing. She gave them a polite nod but remained silent, a quiet signal that this was my battle to fight. We all sat, the silence in the room thick with unspoken demands, heavy like the air before a thunderstorm breaks. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. He got right to it. "Leo," he started, leaning forward in his chair. "We heard about your little windfall. That mine. It's only right that you share that with your family. Your mother and I, we're not doing so well." My mother nodded in vigorous agreement. "You're the oldest, Leo," she added, her voice taking on a whiny, pleading tone. "It's your duty to take care of us." It was like listening to a recording of an old, familiar script, the same words they'd used when they made me get a job as a teenager to help pay the bills, the same logic they'd used when they found my tin box of newspaper money and took it for themselves. But I wasn't that 15-year-old boy anymore. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady the frantic pounding in my chest. "Mom. Dad," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "I already gave you $500,000, money from Thomas. You blew through all of it. I don't owe you anything else." My father let out a harsh, barking laugh as if I'd just told the most ridiculous joke he'd ever heard. "Who the hell do you think you are, talking to us like that? You're sitting on a fortune and you're going to turn your back on your own flesh and blood. You'd be nothing without us." "You can't just abandon us," my mother chimed in, her voice cracking with theatrical emotion. "We're your family." I looked at them then, at these two people who had given me life, and I didn't see parents. I saw two hollowed-out strangers consumed by their own bottomless greed. My mind flashed with images from the past, of nights spent huddled in my bed listening to their drunken fights, of throwing my body in front of my brothers to protect them, of the cold, calculated way they had sold me off and destroyed the first real love I'd ever known. And then I thought about Clara. I thought about the love they had stolen from me. I had never called them on it, never forced them to account for it. But now, in this room, it was time. "You paid her to leave me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You paid Clara to break my heart. Did you really think I'd never find out?" My father's face went slack with shock, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before he recovered, his expression hardening into a familiar, contemptuous sneer. "That girl was trouble, Leo. We did you a favor. Look at you now. You're living the high life." My mother just bowed her head, mumbling something about how they only wanted what was best for me. My hands curled into tight fists, my fingernails biting into my palms. "What was best for me?" I asked, my voice finally breaking, shaking with a rage I'd held back for a lifetime. "You did it for the money. You've never once in my entire life thought about what was best for me. It has always, only ever been about you." It was then that Maeve spoke, her voice cutting through the toxic air in the room, calm but sharp as steel. "Can't you hear yourselves?" she said, her gaze fixed on them. "Leo has done nothing but give to this family even after everything you put him through. He has earned the right to his own life, a life without you in it." My father shot a venomous glare in Maeve's direction, his mouth opening to retaliate, but something in her steady, unflinching stare made him stop. He looked away. A wave of gratitude washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. She was my anchor. She was the reason I wasn't falling apart. I pushed myself to my feet and pointed toward the front door. "I'm not giving you another dime," I said, the words tasting like freedom. "And I don't want to see either of you ever again. My family is here in this house. My family is Maeve and Evan and Noah. You two, you're not my family anymore." The words were brutal, but they were the truest words I had ever spoken. My father started to yell, calling me an ungrateful bastard, but for once my mother seemed to have some sense. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door, her eyes burning with a hatred that I knew would never fade. After the door clicked shut behind them, I just stood in the entryway, my breath coming in ragged bursts, my body trembling as if I'd just finished a grueling race. Maeve wheeled herself over to me and put her hand on my arm. "You did the right thing, Leo," she whispered. I sank to my knees, wrapped my arms around her, and finally I cried. I cried for the parents I never had, for the family I had just lost, and for the little boy who had finally, after all these years, found his voice. It wasn't a cry of grief. It was a cry of liberation. And as the tears subsided, a strange, unsettling thought surfaced in my mind. If my parents hadn't been so cruel, if they hadn't paid Clara to leave, if they hadn't forced me into this marriage with Maeve, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have any of this. Not Maeve, not the foundation, not the quiet evenings watching the sun set over the mountains. I hated them for what they'd done, but I couldn't escape the twisted irony that their cruelty had, in a way, led me to my salvation. I whispered this thought to Maeve, my voice still hoarse. She just smiled, her hand gently stroking my hair. "Sometimes the darkest roads lead us to the most beautiful places," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean you have to be grateful for the darkness. You're the one who found the way out, Leo. You built this life." When I look back now, I can see the long, winding road that brought me from Flat Rock to Boulder. It was a journey with no clear path, full of treacherous drops and moments of despair when I was sure I was lost for good. My parents, with their fists and their silence and their cold, calculated betrayals, left me with wounds that will never completely fade. But those scars are also a part of my story. They are the map that shows how I got here. If they hadn't destroyed my life with Clara, if they hadn't forced me to marry Maeve, I wouldn't have found her. I wouldn't have our garden or our library or our shared love of the stars. I might have had a different life, an easier one perhaps. But I know with every fiber of my being that it would not have been a better one. I don't thank my parents for what they did. They will never deserve my gratitude. But I have come to accept the strange, paradoxical truth that the very worst things that ever happened to me are what ultimately led me to the very best. If I could go back in time and talk to that 15-year-old boy, the one huddled under the covers in that cold, dark house, I know what I would tell him. I would tell him to hold on, to never ever give up. I'd tell him that the darkest nights really do end, that there is a dawn waiting for him. But he has to keep putting one foot in front of the other, especially when he's terrified. And if there's anyone out there reading this, anyone who is trapped in a toxic family, anyone carrying wounds that no one else can see, this is what I want you to know. You are not defined by what has been done to you. You are defined by the choices you make in spite of it. Find your people, the ones who see you and love you for who you are. Grab hold of every small chance you get, and believe, even when it feels impossible, that you will find your way to the light. I did, and you can too. Life never promises to be simple, but it does promise to be worth the fight if you just have the courage to keep going. And I, Leo Callahan, kept going. I found my real family. I built a life on a foundation of honesty and love, and I will never stop dreaming. Because I know now, just as Maeve always has, that every one of us is a story waiting to be told. And my story, though it started in the deepest darkness, is finally shining bright.